This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to episode 46 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Rob Christian of Rob is Creeping It Real. I almost said keeping.
That's all good.
And the Reptile
I get
Talk
to play
podcast.
the idiot today, right?
Yeah, I mean, we both can. I mean, well, I'm sure we'll both have our moments, right? But out of the two of us, I'm sorry, that's my title. So, also co-host on Reptile Talk podcast with Jeremy of Brassman Reptiles, who's just a great guy. So I haven't interacted with him a whole lot, but I mean, you can just tell. I mean, it's weird listening to people on podcasts. You know, it's like you feel like you know them, you know, after a while, because it's like somebody's in your ear an hour and a half or 2 hours a week, and it's like you get a pretty good idea of who you're listening to and all that, and I'm a big fan of that, and I think I was first introduced to you through like the nerd videos, you know, and like blood pythons and keeping bloods and everything, and you had that great video where you kind of unboxed a new short tail, and so yeah, it's I'm honored to have you on, and I want to hear your story, like what got you into reptiles and what got you keeping, and to the point you're at now where it's such a huge part of your life.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of always been in me to be into all the weird, creepy, crawly stuff. My mom actually kept tarantulas before I was born.
Wow.
She has always kind of been a wild child. When she was a kid, you know, back in the day, she had an alligator back when they used to give them away at fairs and stuff. And so she's always kind of been on the fringe of, normal society. And I definitely got all of that passed right on down to me. My dad, on the other hand, is like very kind of straight-laced. So he is a little more hesitant about all this stuff. And so, like, when he was studying, he's retired now, but he used to be an electrician. And when he was studying to become an electrician, my mom would take the train to go meet up with him after his school and his work and stuff. And the place where she would meet up with him had a pet store there, and she would just go in and just like kill time and like look at the animals and all this, that, and the other thing. And talking to the guy who works there, she was like, "What's weird? What do you guys got that's unusual?" And they had a couple tarantulas like on the back, and the guy was like, "Oh, you don't want anything to do with that." And she's like, "Oh yeah, let me see what you got." And so, she, you know, spur of the moment, kind of got a tarantula back then. I think it was a like a Brachypelma species, like a Harmer. I think they're Harmer right now. They used to be Smithi. But, you know, Mexican red knee tarantula. And so she had all that stuff like before I was even born. And we never had a ton of them, but we always had tarantulas when I was a kid. And so I was always like used to being around spiders. And when we had pink toe tarantulas, when my mom would clean out the enclosures, she would just like put them on our shoulder. And so they would just like, you know, crawl all over us, and we just hung out with them. So it wasn't really unusual to me to have weird kind of critters around. And that's when I was really, really young. And my mom told me this story recently, which I did not remember, but she's like, you know, just when you were just starting to walk and kind of get a feel for, you know, exploring, we were out in the yard and you walked over and had found a garter snake and you picked it up. And she's like, you could not take your eyes off of it. It was just like the most fast. She's like, I didn't really know what it was at the time. And I grew up in Massachusetts, so the area where I was at, there's not really any venomous snakes. So it's, you know, you don't really have to panic. just like,
Yeah.
oh, put that down, put it down, put it down. But I was like transfixed on that snake, and ever since then, I've just been obsessed with reptiles, getting every book out of the library I could, trying to learn as much as I could. When I was like 5 or 6 years old, Reptiles magazine came out, and I asked my mom if I could get that. And so I was reading Reptiles magazine when I was like, 6, 7, 8 years old, trying to learn as much as I could. And back then there wasn't really the internet, so it's basically just if I met people who kept snakes. Back then it was like, there was a weird guy who had a big Burmese python and a big fish tank in his house and fed it live rats because he liked to watch them squeeze the life out of it. It's like you don't really want to talk to that guy, but every now and again you'd meet somebody else who has a leopard gecko or a bearded dragon or something along those lines. And then through Reptiles magazine, I learned about like the herp societies. And so when I was maybe 12 or 13 or so, I went to my first like herp society meeting for the New England Herp Society and met other people who were like super into reptiles. And at that point, I had like a variety of different things. I wasn't allowed to really have snakes because my dad is really afraid of snakes. But I had fire-bellied newts. I had green tree frogs. I'd had my first reptile was a Jackson's chameleon, and then Chinese water dragon and leopard geckos. And so I had like a variety of different things at that point, but I never really like got to meet a whole bunch of people who were into that sort of stuff. And then kind of when I started high school, I got the internet at my house because I had to have the internet to do like homework and stuff. And that's when I found like kingsnake.com chat rooms. And I used to get on there and just like watch all the different people who would talk about reptiles and try and figure out who knew what about which different species, and anything that I was interested in, I would try and pick people's brain about it. And, I didn't tell people that I was 13 years old or 14 years old or whatever. I was just like, unrestricted internet access. I was just like, talking to a bunch of, adults about reptiles and just seeing what they knew and learning from them. And then, sharing that information with people when they would come in. Cause like on Saturday nights, I think it was like 8 p.m., they would have like designated reptile chat where everybody would kind of join the chat room, like clear out their schedule for an hour or two and just like talk about reptiles. So I was really into learning from those people. And then, there was a couple reptile shops in New England. I didn't learn that Nerd was close to where I live until I was, 17, at least in my teen years. And there was another store called Regal Reptiles in Rhode Island that I learned about when I was really young. And I went to that store periodically here and there. It was about maybe a little less than an hour from where I lived. So it wasn't
How close was Nerd to you?
About the same, a little more than an hour, just about an hour from where I live
Okay.
too. I grew up just south of Boston, so it was kind of centrally located. But it was easier for me to convince my parents to stop at Regal Reptiles because it was in Rhode Island on the way to visit my mom's family in Connecticut. So I was able to go there more until I got my own vehicle to be able to go to Nerd. And then once I got my own vehicle and like had a job that I was working, I was like, all my money just went to like anytime I had a little bit of extra time on a weekend or, a night or whatever, I'd go up to Nerd and try and learn from the people there and from Kevin and all that sort of stuff. And that started when I was like maybe 17 or 18 years old.
When did you
And
actually
then,
get employed there?
that wasn't until 2016. Yeah,
Okay.
right. Yeah, 2016. Yeah. So people who know about Nerd and Kevin, he's always kind of been a little bit secretive. He doesn't really post a lot of his stuff online until like more recently with the YouTube channel and that sort of stuff. But back in the day, he would just like drop a picture of some crazy morph and people will be like, what the hell is that? And people are freaking out online trying to speculate what it is and where it came from and this, that, and the other thing. But he just would like drop the picture and then log off and go about his business and like not give anyone any information or anything. And so people were always so curious back in the day of what was going on there and what is he breeding and what's going on. And so I was really involved in a lot of the forums back in the day, the ballpythons.net forum, the bloodpythons.com forum, the Nerd Forum, Fauna Classifieds, all those places had their own forums sites. And what I would do is when I went up there and I like kind of got to know Kevin a little bit, I was like, hey man, people really want to see the stuff that you're doing up here. Do you care if I take some pictures of some animals and I'll post them online and I'll kind of like answer people's questions? So you don't have to answer any questions or anything, but I think people will be really interested to see the stuff that you're working with. And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And I was like, I'm not gonna like, I don't take any credit for it. Like I'm not gonna say that these are my animals or anything like that. I would post, at the top of the post, visited nerd photo album, and it would just be like a whole bunch of pictures of reticulated pythons and ball python morphs and monitors and like this, that, and the other, whatever I could figure out to get a couple of pictures of. And so from the time that I was like 17, 18-ish, I would go up there, I would clean snakes for a while. I'd be like, where do you need help? What do you want cleaned? I'll do whatever. I'm not gonna, don't pay me. I just want to learn things. I just want to get hands-on experience. And so they would have me, work with this and work with that. And once they got a feel for, my experience level, I got on more and more and more like advanced stuff and working with reticulated pythons and this, that, and the other thing. And so I built a pretty good relationship with the people who work there, and I learned a lot. But back to like the forums, I would go there and I would take like, 40, 50 pictures of different animals and then share them on the forums, and the forums would go crazy with people trying to figure out, oh man, what is this? What is this, that, the other thing? And so even back then I was kind of played a little bit of a role in their social media and tried to get some of that information out there, because I would go there and I'd be like, that's cool, that's awesome, what the hell is this? And sometimes I would get answers, sometimes he'd be like, stop secret. And so I would just share pictures with people and answer their questions to the best of my ability, and I enjoyed doing that. And it was I think kind of what got my foot in the door as a like when I got hired there, it kind of led into that.
Wow. And I mean, so that was 2016 that you actually got hired?
Yeah. So I was working at a reptile store in Maine before that, from 2012 or 2013. And when that store closed down, I was like in a kind of crappy spot because the house that I was renting, the person who I was renting with, they were just like taking my portion of the rent and using it on stuff that they shouldn't have been using it on instead
Oh,
of actually paying
geez.
the bills. Yeah. And so I got a eviction notice, and for a while, Kevin and the people at Nerd have been like, hey man, you should come down and work here. You should come down and work here. You should come down and work here. And when I got that notice, I called them, or I can't remember what I called them. I went down there and I was like, hey, if you're serious about that, if you can figure out a place for me to like, move into, I will come down there and I'll work for you. And that's kind of how that ended up happening. He was like, yep, come on down. And at first, I basically just worked in their pet store. They have like a retail pet store there. And so I just worked in that retail store where I was just like helping customers, and I did some educational programs, and because that's kind of where I got my start with like professionally doing reptiles, is educational programs. But a lot of my job was just like helping customers and getting people their first pet snake, and taking care of the animals in their pet store and all that jazz. And then after a while, I started incorporating it to the social media aspect of things, and then doing some of the sales stuff and shipping out animals and all that jazz. So towards the end, my job was like a little bit of everything. I did education. We did tours there every weekend. So if you showed up and you got $8, you can take a tour of the nerd facility, and we would bring you upstairs, show you reticulated pythons, monitors, alligator snapping turtle, ball pythons, corn snakes,
Wow.
variety of different stuff. And then at the end, do a little demo with some venomous snakes to like teach people about them. And so at the end, I was doing like coordinating the tours, doing educational programs, doing the sales. Most of the things that shipped out, worked on the shipping stuff, sales, marketing, social media, all that jazz. So I was doing a little bit of just about everything when it came to to there at the time when I left.
What's it like making those YouTube videos, and like are you naturally that amped up about reptiles? I have like I get easily amped up about stuff when I'm in front of just people that are
Yeah,
enjoying it, you know? So like when you say like doing tours and things like that, I could see myself getting amped up for that, right? And
yeah.
educating people. But like doing it for a YouTube video, like how draining is that? Like, are you like, because your energy was super high. Like, so
Yeah.
was that like is that something that you had just like key into? And then how drained were you afterwards, or did it not phase you at all?
That sort of stuff doesn't phase me, and I think for me, I used to make YouTube videos like in 2007, 2008. So like when snake bites was first kind of a thing, on YouTube, and YouTube was just kind of getting its start. Used to make videos back then. And for me, it's weird because I always think about it just as like the moment. It's hard for me to like think about all the other stuff that goes on after the moment of recording. So like it's just 5 minutes of energy for me, and then our camera guy would edit and post all that stuff, and so you'd have to go through all that stuff. And even when I was editing my own videos, it's the impact that it had afterwards is harder for me to wrap my mind around than the couple minutes of, oh man, check this out, this thing's really cool. Because like if I'm around reptile people, that's how I talk about reptiles. I'm like, oh man, look at this thing, and check this out. And I get really hyped really easy. And so some of the videos I would come to Donnie and I'd be like, or the camera guy nerd, and I'd be like, hey man, I think this thing's really cool, let's do a video on it. And then sometimes he would come to me and he'd be like, hey, I saw this video that went crazy viral, let's try and do something like that. How can you help me? And either one way or another, we would just figure out what we want to record. And I never put a ton, I shouldn't say I didn't put a ton of thought into it, but like it it's not stressful for me.
Mm.
um it's just like second nature to me, I guess. And that is less draining to me than working in the retail store and dealing with like regular people all the time. Because a lot of people who I talk to who are really into reptiles, I'm like, oh yeah, we're on the same page, like, yeah, these things are cool. Do you know about these? Let's talk about this. Let's this, that, and the other thing. And then you get some people who come into the pet store and they're like, oh, my bearded dragon will only eat regular mealworms, it won't eat crickets, it won't eat roaches, it won't eat superworms. And I'm like, yes it will, please feed it something other than mealworms. And they're like, nope, no it won't. And those people, you try and do what you can, but at the end of the day, those people think they know their pet the best, and some people listen to you, some people don't.
Yeah.
And that for me is way more draining than hopping on camera for a couple minutes and be like, yo, check out this freaking awesome thing that we just did. And because I was always excited about talking about that stuff. And so I think the part that, not that it was draining, but the camera guy, Donnie, he's into like videos and the social media aspect of things, and not as much into the reptile things. He likes the reptiles and everything, but he's not as into it as I am. So I would be like, this thing's really cool, and he'd be like, this is boring. And I'd be like, no, it's really cool, I swear it's so cool. Like we did a video, I was like, man, people love red-eye crocodile skinks, so we should do a video on red-eye croc skinks. And he was like, I don't know, man. And I was like, let's just try it. Come on. People love them. They look like mini dragons. We'll get some close-up shots. And the video did horribly. And he's like, see, this is what I'm telling you. And I'm like, you got me there. You got me there. It didn't really do the numbers I thought it was going to do. I still think that they're cool. But like, as far as him, he's looking at metrics and making sure that our audience, it gets out to a lot of people. And I think that that's one of the things that is hard for a lot of people in the reptile industry to like, how do you say, like reckon with, is
Mm.
that if you want to change people's minds and you want to get a message about reptiles across, you cannot just cater to the people who already know things about reptiles. You can't just make videos for the people who are already into it. You have to make videos for people who know nothing about reptiles, and their only experience about reptiles is, I don't know, the kid down the road has a bearded dragon and I saw that movie Holes, and I swear that those things are real. They're not the same thing. And I've had people come into the store and they're like, "Hey, do you have the 6-spotted lizard?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "They have like a frill on them." And I was like, "The fictional things from the movie Holes with Shia LaBeouf?" And they're like, "Oh, no, 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 they're real. They're real. I swear they're real." And then I would pull up a picture and they'd be like, "Yeah, that thing." And I was like, "That is fake. That's CGI. Please don't. Please don't. You don't need a lizard right now." Like, I swear. Um, so, uh, for a lot of people, they look at like I personally am not a big fan of clickbait either, but it does what it's supposed to do. It gets people to click on the video to watch it, and then if you have a good retention time, you get people who stay and then maybe learn something after they clicked on the video. And so it's a very fine line to ride. And I personally am not a fan of the people who do irresponsible things, especially with venomous snakes or large snakes or things like that. I'm personally not a fan of those sort of clickbait videos or those things that get people. A lot of those people are just watching to see if you get hurt or killed.
Mm-hmm.
And for me personally, that's not ever the vibe that I kind of like to key into. And I've done videos that are like crazy and things kind of went off the rails, like the centipede video I did for Nerd. I was showing off Scolopendra gigantea, or I think they're called like the Scolopendra species white legs now. And it's like this really big centipede. And it was chill. It was just like hanging out, and I'm trying to like make sure that Donnie can get some good shots of it. And then I open up the container for Dahani. I think it's the Vietnamese centipede, and the thing just like shot out and just like took off across the floor. And I'm like, oh crap, damn, this is not good. And I'm using the tongs like trying to grab it so it doesn't go underneath the enclosures, and things kind of went off the rails. But in that moment, I wasn't really in danger. There was no one else in the room. It was just us. So when people see stuff like that, it's funny because it's like you can't predict that something like that is going to happen. And if you're looking at things from a purely responsible keeper thing, yeah, there's a lot of things I could have done to have that situation go more smoothly, but also it gets people to watch and people learn some things. And I still have people that come up to me and they're like, man, that centipede video, like I thought you were really going to get hurt. And I was like, yeah, I kind of was a little worried too, but on the I try to look at things as like a risk reward kind of situation, right? Because the amount of risk that you're taking, what is the actual reward, what is the actual payoff that you're going to get from this? Putting a rattlesnake around your shoulders, really high risk. For me, really low reward. It's not really, what are people going to think? Oh wow, he put a big snake on his shoulders. Also, that snake could probably kill him. Maybe it's going to bite him in the face. Some people just want to see it bite him in the face. And for me, that is not really the audience that I ever wanted to pander to, or the people who I felt needed to see the videos. Because my thing is, if you see somebody who is holding a cobra very close to their face and they're bobbing their head back and forth and it's got its mouth open and all that sort of stuff, that's really high risk, right? Even if you're doing things as safely as possible, it's high risk because they still have a range of motion. You can't predict what that animal's going to do. Just look at all the people who free handle who end up getting bit by something. You really can't predict 100% what that thing is going to do. So it's really high risk. For me, it's really low reward. And the average person is going to look at it and be like, wow, that snake is really pissed off and is trying to bite him. So you can get the same exact effect by holding up a water snake that is pretty big and holding it up, because a lot of water snakes are hyper defensive and they're going to open up their mouth at you. And I've literally recorded clips of me doing that with a water snake where I'm like, holding it up and bobbing my head back and forth. And the snake is like opening up its mouth and it looks really like enticing for people who are like, scared or might have feelings about that. But the risk is low. It's really, really low. If the snake turns around and bites my hand, or even if it were worst case scenario to bite my face, I'm okay. At the end of the day, I'm okay. I put it down, I wipe it off, clean it out. Everything's cool. I don't have to go to the hospital. I don't need to, potentially put the greater hobby at risk by doing something like that. And honestly, as I've gone, even stuff like that is less interesting to me now, because when you see a snake that's doing that, they are scared. They are really, really scared, and they are afraid for their life. And that is what people are really profiting off of, is this animal that's terrified, and they're saying, look, it's fighting for its life. And in reality, you're not going to do anything to that snake, but it thinks that its life is in danger.
Yeah.
And so I have done a couple different videos now of interacting with wild snakes a little bit differently, where instead of like running up and grabbing them and, picking them up and freaking them out and everything, I will just like sit down on the ground with them and put my hand out to see what they do. Because, a lot of people think that snakes are just these like evil creatures that are going to come chase after you and they're going to bite you and they are just, mean and scary and blah, 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 blah. But realistically, most animals are not like that. They're just another creature that's kind of on this planet with us. And so
Yeah.
in these videos, water snakes have a really bad reputation. I've done this a couple times now with water snakes where I'll just sit down on the bank, next to them, and I'll just put my hand out, like kind of not underneath their head at first, but like just kind of near them and then see what happens. And some of them just take off and dive into the water. That's fine. I didn't need to put hands on it anyway. But some of them, I've literally had situations where I just like inch my hand closer and closer, and they just like flick their tongue. They kind of look at me. They're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm able to like get up underneath their chin and like touch their face, and they don't bite, they don't musk, they don't freak out, they don't panic. At least not outwardly. And then I just like get up and walk away. And for me, it gives me a little bit of a different lens to look at how some of the interactions in the videos that people post with snakes read. Because if this snake was not scared and it's relaxed, it's not going to bite and strike and go crazy and this, that, and the other thing. And it might not be that sort of stuff is definitely more interesting to the average person. But like I said, the average person is probably looking at it hoping that you get bit or get hurt. And if you watch a lot of these like influencers who do free handling or do like reptile stuff, a lot of them will like badger the animal. So instead of just like picking it up, they will like touch it on a bunch of different sides and it gets it to like flip around and all this stuff. And that will keep people's attention for sure. People will be invested and interested in watching that because they don't know what's going to happen next. And as somebody who like knows a lot about snake behavior and about handling snakes, I can see that he had 47 opportunities to pick that snake up and stop harassing it, but instead, touch, and it keeps the average person going, "Oh man, I thought you were gonna go get bit," and it keeps your retention time. It gets you paid. I get that.
Yeah.
But for me, I think that I am moving more in a direction of seeing how these animals interact when they're not scared.
So has that been just a personal growth that you've gone through over the years where you used to think more what would be more sensational, what's going to get the eyes on me, and now you're just thinking more what's more important for the animal?
Not exactly, because I've never been crazy about like I gotta get views, I gotta get people to follow me. I don't care about that sort of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
not I shouldn't say that I don't care, because all of us, if we're doing a podcast or doing something, we want people to be able to see it.
Sure.
But that's never been the most important thing to me. And there's been a bunch of times where our camera guy had brought up videos and he's like, "Man, this type of video really goes crazy." And I was like, "I want nothing to do with this. You'll have to get somebody else to film it, because I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that." And he would get really frustrated with me because he knows that I like bring an energy and like an excitement to things. And if we did it, I'm sure that it would get lots and lots of views and people would be really interested in it. But for me personally, it didn't jive with how I like to portray the animals or to portray the company or anything like that. And so like I have posted videos that got lots of views. Like a bazillion years ago, I posted a video of a couple bearded dragons that I had adopted, and we put them in my living room, and the male's going crazy, head bobbing and like running all over the place. And it got a lot of views for the time. I think it got like 100,000 views like back in the day. And so like back then that was like a lot of views. And for me, I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Like people think it's interesting." But I was not like oh man, I got to keep doing this so that I can keep getting followers and keep getting views and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. I posted stuff that I find interesting. And so the stuff that I post is not necessarily attention grabbing. It's not necessarily something that all audiences are going to find interesting. I just post what I like. And when it comes to the snake interactions, I think for a long time, it's like I got to get my hands on every single snake that I see. And, I still feel like that sometimes where I'm like, oh man, I really want to pick up the snake. But then there's a lot of situations where I'll see a snake and I'm like, oh man, this thing's like, it looks really comfortable right now. I'm not gonna mess with it. Like, I since I moved down here, the people who live here, who I've spoken to, who field herp regularly, they were like, "Oh yeah, you can find snakes like year round down here." And I was like, "Yes, that's for me." So every month of the year, I try and find at least one snake. And since I moved down here, I think I've only missed 1 or 2 months where I haven't found a snake. And most recently, I mean, with the snow and the cold that we've got the last couple of weeks, I was really scared that I wasn't going to find my January snake. But a couple of weeks ago, I went out to a spot that I regularly see snakes at, and I did see one snake. I saw a queen snake, and it was perched up on the edge of this like big boulder that's right on the side of a river. And it was pretty cold out, so 40s, mid 40s maybe. And I took some pictures of it. I took some video of it. But I was not really compelled to try and grab that animal because if I try to grab it and I miss, it's going to jump in the water, and the water is pretty cold right now and probably not the best for it to be hopping into it. It could handle it if it needed to, but I don't want to send its, little mind into fight or flight and feel like it's about to die.
Yeah.
And then, so if it goes into the water, no good. If I end up grabbing it, it's now going to think that I'm going to kill it, and it's going to stress it the hell out. And so I took some video of it, but I didn't touch it or anything. And then I just went about my way and I left. And for me, back in the day, I was like, oh man, I gotta grab and touch and everything. And there's still some scenarios where I'm like, oh man, I really want to interact with this animal. Like when I went out to Utah with some of the guys from the NPR podcast, um, and like I guess some people in that universe. Seeing rattlesnakes, there's no really rattlesnakes in New England. They're endangered up there. I've seen like one in my entire life when I lived in New England.
Wow.
Wild rattlesnakes, because they're so endangered, they're so rare. So when I went out to Utah and got to see rattlesnakes all over the place, we're road cruising and we're stopping every couple minutes to move a rattlesnake off the road. I was like, oh man, I gotta hook this. Let me hold on. Let me take pictures of this thing. I'm so excited. And so in those scenarios, I was like, oh man, I want to work with every one that I see. And down here in the spot where I'm at in North Carolina, there's pretty much only copperheads. You have to go like an hour in any direction to see cottonmouths or timbers or canebrakes or anything like that. And so the copperheads are like 50-50. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, I want to like hook this out so I can take some pictures of it or whatever. And then sometimes I see them and I'm like, you are very comfortable right now. I'm just going to leave you where you're at. and so for me, it's kind of in the middle. Sometimes I like to interact with them. Sometimes I'm just like, you know what, whatever. For me, I think that pushing that little, I shouldn't say the envelope because it's not an envelope really, but trying to see what happens when I approach them just as another critter, just as another, living being on this planet. I think that has been a lot more interesting to me recently than like grabbing them and having them panic and freaking out and then calming them down. And, after a while they realize that they're not going to get killed, or, I'm assuming that they realize that they're not getting killed and they stop really panicking. But who knows, maybe that they still think that I'm going to kill them, and there's no way of me to communicate to them, hey, I'm not going to hurt you. I just think you're really pretty and I want to look at you for a little while, which makes it sound much more creepy than it actually is. But basically, I'm trying to look at things just a little bit differently, because I think I was trying to get to the point a little bit earlier is that a lot of people think that snakes are just like bite, attack, blah, 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 because that's how media kind of portrays them.
Yeah.
When in reality, you can't survive as a creature in the wild if everything that comes up to you, you attack, because a lot of creatures are bigger and stronger than you, and they will hurt or kill you if they feel scared or threatened. That's one of the things that I would try to tell people when I did the tours, the educational programs at Nerd. Is like, I would take a a venomoid forest cobra out, and I'd have areas sectioned off so people are not close to them or anything, and I would take it out and I would show it a hide box, and it would like maybe come at me a little bit, but as soon as it saw the hide box, 9 times out of 10 it was like shoo, right into the hide box, and everyone's like, why did it do that? And I'm like, because it's safe in there. I can't touch it really, without going into this little tiny hole where it can very easily defend itself. When it's out in the open, it's very exposed. It has to defend itself a little bit if I'm a creature that looks like I'm attacking it, but honestly, it doesn't want to. And I would walk around the outside of the hide box and show people like, look, it is not coming out to attack me. This snake does not want to fight. I'm so much bigger than this snake. Snakes are a big, long backbone with a bunch of ribs. If they get stomped in the middle, that's it. That's a wrap. The broken back, that snake's done. They don't want to risk that. And so when you see people putting together the pieces of like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Why did I think that this thing was just going to come out and attack you? And, trying to reframe the way that people look at snakes like that, I think has been more interesting to me now than just getting people's attention so that they, look at something. It's cool. I like being able to share stuff with reptiles with people, but again, risk reward for me, it's the risk of having like portraying snakes as something that is just attacking and evil and something that people can put their projections on of fear is not worth the reward of getting a couple views, even if it gets me paid. Like I have a regular job. I don't care if people watch my stuff or not. Like I hope that the people who are interested in it watch it, but the average person now, if they are, looking for just plain regular content, my content's probably not going to be it for them. I think some of those videos that I've posted where I interact with wild snakes, some of those have reached people, but again, it's not as broad of an audience as the people who want to see someone who almost get bit by an alligator, or people who want to see a cobra get a real close call with somebody and bite their pants or something like that. So
Did you ever have any close calls when you were at Nerd?
Not really. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a very cautious handler, especially when it comes to the venomous stuff. I almost always use a hook. I am very cautious when putting things in containers. I like Phil Wolf from Venomous Exchange Radio and the Herpeticulture Network. He did some videos of like safe venomous snake handling, and I feel like that's kind of the route that I would try to do when I worked with anything that was potentially dangerous. And so when I would take things out, I would use 1 or 2 hooks. If I had to tail things, I would tail things. I'd put them into a container. A lot of times I would have a loop on the top of the container where I could slide the hook through and use the hook to put the top on the container and then press down, as opposed to using my hands and fingers. I'm very, very cautious when it comes to working with the majority of things. And you can ask the people who have worked with me in the past. I get bit by non-venomous stuff very rarely. Even the non-venomous stuff, I handle with confidence, and I am a little bit cautious. And so I didn't hardly ever get bit by anything, especially not anything bad. But when you're working with these things day in and day out, there's always situations where you're like, oh man, I could have done things differently. Or if that snake had wanted to do something, it probably could have done something. But honestly, especially with the venomous stuff, I was hyper cautious, made sure that when I was shifting, I'm always locking containers. I'm always making sure that the enclosure is clear before I go in there and start cleaning. I don't think I had any like close calls of hardly anything. I got bit by some monitors. That sucked. But, when people hear like close call, they think of like, a rattlesnake or a cobra or like anything. No, I didn't. I was always very hyper aware. And a lot of times when I was working with the venomous snakes, I would like go into a room and close the door and like put a note on the door that's like, hey, working with venomous snakes, don't come in here unless it's an emergency. And I would try to keep my focus on exactly what I'm doing. It's very easy to get distracted or to, get complacent. And I tried my best to not have those things happen. I think that the closest call that I had with a venomous snake was my own fault and something that I would not do today. But when I lived in Massachusetts, there's like a place where you can find copperheads, and they're endangered in Massachusetts. They're considered endangered, but in the areas where you can find them, there are a decent amount of them there. And so I went out there and I was finding them pretty regularly. But when I first started going there, I was exploring these trails and looking around, and you can literally find them on the trails in this particular area where I was finding them. And so I was like hiking along these trails and I'm looking at these rocky outcroppings, and they were like, oh, check the rocky areas. That's where they're going to be. And so I went up to this area that had some big flat rocks, and they were kind of like stacked like this. And one of them kind of jutted out over the bottom one that was kind of on the ground. And there was like a bunch of leaves underneath and some bushes and stuff. And so I'm like looking around the top of the rocks and looking underneath and shining my flashlight underneath. And I'm like getting pretty close in there, like looking, because a lot of times they'll be in the back of the rock crevices. And so I'm like looking in there and I don't see anything. And I'm like, man, it looks like there be one like right here. And I took my hand and I swiped across the leaves to like move the leaves out of the way. And there was one curled up right there. And I put my hand like right over the top of it when I swiped. And so like I swiped the leaves off and I was like, whoa, jump back. And I'm like, damn, there's one like right there. That was so stupid. I should have never done that. And it didn't strike. It didn't like, it saw me, but it was not like defensive or anything. It was relying on its camouflage, but I put my hand like right over the top of that thing. And, as far as venomous snakes go, copperheads, probably not going to kill me. It probably would have been shitty, and, I probably would have had to go to the hospital, but, risk of losing a finger or dying so low with them that, I won't do that again. I'll just say that. I've gone back to that spot. I'm always like, oh man, I can't believe that I did that. And I put my face down relatively close to that in the crevice, looking at the back, and it had 150 opportunities to have bitten me, but it just didn't work out that way. And you live and you learn. You make some mistakes, and you hope that the mistakes are not ones that end you up in the hospital. And luckily, that one did not end me up in the hospital. So, that is the closest call that I've had. Aside from that, I am so cautious. I'm so careful. I don't think I've had anything that would classify as like close calls.
No bites from any invertebrates or anything.
No, knock on wood. I have never been bit by a tarantula. Actually, you know what? I have been bit by an invertebrate once. When I was working at Nerd, when we got in our orders like cork bark and stuff, they would get false widows in there all the time. And so sometimes when I was like unloading cork bark and stuff, they would just like be crawling all over the place. And one time, one got stuck in my shirt and I didn't realize, and I felt something like pinch my arm, and I was like, what the hell? And I like shook out my sleeve and nothing came out. And I was like, okay. So I'm just going about my work, doing my thing. And all of a sudden I feel the pinching again. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And it's like, shake it more. And then I see little like pinch marks on my arm. And so I took my shirt off. And when I took my shirt off, or like I was going to take my shirt off, a false widow like came straight down the bottom of it. And I was like, oh man, that's annoying. And so, they're not dangerous. They're not medically significant. That's the only time I've ever been bit by a spider ever. And it was my own fault. It was caught in my shirt. It was probably not feeling too comfortable at that moment either. And, Other than that, I've never been bit by a tarantula. You know, knock on wood. I've never been bit by a tarantula. I've been keeping tarantulas my whole life. I've handled a lot of stuff that I don't recommend that people handle, and that's
Like
another thing
what?
where like Poecilotheria species, Indian ornamentals, the lowland ornamentals, the metallic, the Goody sapphire ornamentals. I've handled so I never kept like Tapaniquinus, the really crazy stuff, like crazy fast stuff that bites. I've never kept OBTs, P. marinus. I never kept those, and those ones are quick to bite. But I've handled sun tigers and Poecilotheria and skeleton legs and all that stuff. And back in the day, I was very interested to see if I could do it, and then now I'm much more hands off with my spiders. I don't really take them out all that much, and again, risk reward for me is not really worth it. Even just the mechanical damage from their fangs is no fun. So uh, I I'm much more cautious now than I used to be, and even then it's less life threatening stuff. And I have had a couple close calls with spiders though. One time my friend had a cobalt blue and he's like, hey man, you have a nice camera, can you come over and take some pictures of it? And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so I had taken pictures of it before, and usually it like comes and like sits with its legs out, and it's really easy to take pictures of. But in this particular day, it was like curled up in the corner, and so I used like a paintbrush to like brush it, but it didn't move. And I was like, come on, man. And so like absentmindedly, I like went in there with my hand and like touched its butt, like just like not hard, but like, tapped its back legs. And when the moment I touched it, it whipped around, lifted up its front legs, slapped my fingers with its front legs, and then like reared back with its fangs going. And I was like, oh, that was almost so bad. That was dumb. Why did I do that? That was so stupid. And we're both like, jumping back from the container and everything. And that was dumb. I shouldn't have done that. And then I had one time where I had I think it was a P. armenia Venezuelan sun tiger, and I was trying to get it into like a bigger vial, and I was trying to do it like with one vial holding the other vial. It was stupid, not the way I should have done it. Usually when I do all like rehouses, I do it in the bathtub. I use a paintbrush or a chopstick. I scoot them from one into the other. Everybody's fine. If it runs, it's in a bathtub. There's nowhere it can go. I got a little catch cup. I catch it. I put it away. I was being dumb. I was in my bedroom and I was like, I'm just going to just real quick. It's just going to go from one thing into the other. And so it ran into the other container, and then it started coming back out, and I took the lid, and it was in my other hand, and I went to go slide the lid over the top, and I pressed down too hard and pressed the vial straight down onto the floor, and it like spun around and then shot across the floor. And I was like, oh man, that's not good. And it was, a couple inches. It wasn't a huge one. It wasn't a small one either. And I tore apart my room looking for that spider, and I could not find it. I was so mad. I was like, oh, well, my mom's going to be mad. And
Oh man.
like 3 or 4 days later, I was getting ready to go out with my friends. I put my pants on, and as I'm like wiggling my pants up, it runs out of the bottom of the pant leg and like go across the floor.
Shit.
Could have ended very differently if it was going the other direction in the pant leg.
Oh no.
But that was another one where like I was being dumb. I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing, and it didn't bite me. It didn't even like try to bite me, but it could have been different if it was in a different part of those pants. I'll tell you what.
Oh man. Yeah, that's terrifying. That made my hands sweat. What about scorpions? Do you keep any scorpions?
I used to keep emperor scorpions, and I really love flat rock scorpions. I think they're really interesting and an underrated species. And oh man, what is it called? I think it's Hottentotta franzwerneri. Those are the coolest looking scorpions. They have really specific care requirements though. And I don't have anything set up that would be able to keep those at the moment, but I love those. I kept those for a little while. I kept emperor scorpions for a long time. I like the emperors because really low, like mild venom, Really impressive size. So for educational programs, really great. It's easy for people to see them. I can take them out and put them on my hand. Even if they pinch you, I mean, the pinches kind of suck, but the stings, no big deal. I've been stung by an emperor like a million years ago. And all the hotter stuff is kind of boring to me because most of them are very bland looking. I like stuff that's got contrast and
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of color. And so like the emperor, it's a big glossy black scorpion. It's cool as hell looking. And
Yeah.
the Hottentotta Franz Werneri, man, I hope I'm getting that genus right. I know the species is Franz Werneri, but I'm pretty sure the genus is Hottentotta. The Franz Werneri, they're like a like black and yellow, and so they got like these tips on their claws and on the tail. I like those. They're really cool. But the majority of like the Israeli Deathstalkers and like a lot of the other like cool scorpions are really boring looking to me.
Yeah.
And again, risk reward is just not there. I'm like, okay. And the scorpions are pretty easy because they can't climb glass. You can move them with tongs and all that sort of stuff. But scorpions are not quite as interesting to me as tarantulas are. So I don't have any I don't have any scorpions right now. I do have some tarantulas right now, but I'm not particularly inclined to get more into scorpions at the moment.
What's your favorite memory of working at Nerd?
It has to be. There's like a couple like really big moments for me working there. Well, one of them would probably be hatching out the baby dwarf caiman.
Oh wow.
And there's nothing in the world like that. Seeing a little dinosaur hatch out right into your hands is like the most unique experience. It's hard to describe. And I told you, like, when I was much, much younger, I used to go and volunteer at Nerd. And one of the first times that his female came and laid eggs, I was actually the person that found them. And basically, he's got like a big enclosure. He's changed things up now, but he had a big enclosure that they were in, but it's like primarily water enclosure. And I went in there and I was like, there's some eggs in the water. And I grabbed Andy, the guy who was kind of managing things at the time. And I was like, hey, Andy, did you guys feed the caiman eggs? That's weird. These don't look like chicken eggs. What are you guys doing? And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? And I was like, the female caiman has got like, I don't remember, 4 or 5 eggs in there right now. Like, did you guys feed them eggs? And he was like, oh shit, we got to get them out right now. Like, and so we ended up pulling the male and the female out, and I don't know that they were able to hatch any of those eggs that she laid from that clutch out. But after that year, they started ultrasounding her regularly and pulling her out so that she can make nests and all that sort of stuff. And so going from that to working there and being there while she's building her nest and helping dig up that nest, pull those eggs out, set them up in the incubator, and then stare at them for a couple months while they incubate, And when you hear, because before the eggs hatch out, the babies start calling, and so you'll hear from the incubator,
Really?
yeah, not like at that frequency, but every couple minutes you'll hear a couple of them going. And so like for a day or two, we're just like all glued to the incubator waiting for the first baby to kind of like pop out. And typically Kevin likes to be there as each one is hatching out, so he kind of gets that like bond, that little bit of maternal bond with those babies.
He's like John Hammond.
And yeah, exactly. It was just like that. And so one of the days that the babies started hatching out, I noticed, I was like, oh man, they're starting to hatch. So we get Kevin together, we bring the egg box into one of the rooms that we use for recording, and I'm getting Donnie together and talking to people and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm going into the room to like periodically check to make sure that they're not popping out. And I'm standing there and a baby sticks its nose out. And I was like, oh man, somebody go grab Kevin. And so I'm in the room and I like scoop up this egg and the baby like just pops right out in my hand. I'm like, oh shit. It just hatched right out into my hand. And so Kevin comes a couple minutes later and I'm like, the first one's out, man. This is so exciting. And he's like, oh man, I was supposed to be in here. And I was like, sorry, man. I could it literally had just started to pop out. And I didn't want it to just like dive into the perlite or the hatch rate. as soon as it came out. And so I like picked up the egg and it hatched out in my hand. And so I handed it to him, and getting to see those baby caiman hatch out, and like right as soon as they come out, it is so unbelievably cool. They've got the osteoderms down their back and onto their tail, right? And they've got the scutes that kind of stick up on the edges of their tail that help propel them in the water. But when they're born, because inside the egg they're so strapped for space, those osteoderms, that are the scales on the sides, are actually folded down. And so when they
Mm.
first hatch out, they're like folded down, and then over the next couple of days they kind of like straighten out and
Wow.
whatever. But when they first come out, the everything is kind of like pressed down, and so seeing those babies, hearing them, that is just there's nothing like it. It's literally like Jurassic Park watching those baby caiman come out.
That's so cool. Would you ever own one?
Um, I don't know. I like crocodilians enough, but the amount of space that you really need to donate to them, I keep so many other cooler things, and like it for me, cooler things
Yeah,
than a
yeah.
caiman or a crocodilian. If anything, if I was going to get any sort of like lizard-like thing, a Bell's lace monitor is top of my list. Has been since I was a kid, and now that they're breeding those in the States, that's if I get any sort of like lizard, like bigger lizard, it's probably going to be one of those.
How does Kevin get the time to put in with all the animals, with socializing them and everything? Like it seems like he's like ridiculously busy. Is that like a group effort though? Is that like is everybody trained, like all the staff to socialize those animals, like the black dragons and everything, all the monitors and all that?
So some of it is the staff and the people who work with them on a daily basis. Part of the like another piece of the puzzle is captive breeding. And when you work with captive bred animals, especially when you're working with, you're not putting together animals that are scared and frightened and have a higher stress response. Not breeding two of those animals together. Try to breed
Mm,
something that's maybe a little bit more flighty to something that's more chill, or breeding two really chill animals together usually results in offspring that are really laid back and really chill too. So that's another piece of the puzzle. So part of it is the employees and their interactions with the animals. Part of it is the genetics and the initial stock that you're working with. And then another part would definitely be Kevin and the way that he interacts with the animals. He is really strapped for time. He's always running around doing something, but a lot of the stuff that he does is socialization of working with,
mm,
anacondas and monitors and caiman. And, certain employees have certain animals that they particularly like, and animals that particularly like them, like Gubu, the water monitor. He's like one of the smaller breeder male Java water monitors that we had there. He was a really chill monitor, but he really liked me. And one of the black dragon females that was there, she adored me in particular. Like you could come up to the enclosure and she'll come check you out and everything. But because I was like constantly changing her water and I'm in there every day and, working with her and all this sort of stuff, if I come up to the enclosure, she's like reaching through the thing trying to get out. And if I open up the door, she like comes right over to me, climbs up onto me. And like while I'm going and cleaning enclosure, sometimes I just let her like chill on my shoulder. And one of the adult female breeders, Lorelei, she's another one where like if I went into room 12, which was like the last room in the hallway before the office with all the like really big adult monitors and the croc monitors and everything, she was in that room. And if I went in that room at all, like at all, that's where I would take photos for the website. If I went in there, she would scratch and scratch and scratch and scratch and scratch at the door until I open it up and like give her some attention. And even then, sometimes like most of it is plastic, but there's like a big screen area on the door too. And what she would do is she would climb up to the top, and then she would like loosely let go and like drag her claws all the way down the screen until I would like, take her out. And sometimes I would just like let her chill in the room with me, because she's so laid back. She's so chill. She's so like curious and friendly. And so I would work with her a lot, and I miss that monitor. She was really cool. But, everyone's got their own particular animals that they kind of like to work with and interact with. And you over time you build kind of like a relationship with that animal. So, each employee plays a role in that as well as Kevin, and then also the genetics of the animal.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
How like you're really big into short tails,
Yeah.
and I'm getting a pair of bloods from Kara,
Ooh.
and
Oh yeah.
yeah. I'm so excited. They're martyr line, so like I just wanted to go like
Ooh.
yeah, I just wanted like
Red.
the reddest blood pythons I could get. I wanted to go that route over morphs, and so like what I like the way that you seem to think about animals. Like you think about what they're feeling,
Mhm.
and kind of what they're going through and all that. So with all that being said, what can you tell me getting my pair of blood pythons? Like how to keep them and keep them not stressed out.
Mhm. A lot of people are not going to like this answer, but in the 20-ish years of keeping bloods and short tails, don't put them in a glass front enclosure.
Mm,
I hate to say that, or you know what? I honestly don't care because I care about what's right for the animals. I don't really give a shit what other people think. But I've got so many people, and I've watched over years and decades of people trying and ultimately reverting away from it. But bloods and short tails are a type of species that's highly terrestrial and even maybe fossorial. If you look at some of the videos of wild short tails and where they're finding them, a lot of times it's under root systems or in like paddy fields or things like that where they have lots and lots of coverage. And the the way that glass front enclosures are set up, it often, for whatever reason, bloods and short tails typically don't feel secure in them. And I have seen people who have got bloods and short tails that they like hand raise from babies and they're super chill, puppy, chill on their lap while they're watching TV. And then they get them to adult size. They're like, I'm so excited to put them in this, 4-foot enclosure that I got. And they put them in there. And then now every time they go in there, the thing loses its mind. It flips out. They're famous for throwing around their body weight when they're frightened. And so, they put this animal in this enclosure. They think everything's cool. They've got hides, they got plants, this, that, and the other thing. And then the temperament switches immediately. And the snake no longer lets them touch it. It, musks, it bites,
mm,
tense and rigid the entire time that they're working with it. For whatever reason, they just do better in racks or in tubs. People are going to hate that. I know it. And if you go in the blood python groups and just watch people over time, you get people all the time who will come in there and be like, I want to do a full bioactive enclosure for my blood python. And the people who have been around a long time are like, probably not going to work out. They pee a lot. Their pee is highly acidic. Like their urine is highly acidic. It kills the plants. It kills the isopods. They typically don't really feel secure in glass front enclosures, and people are like, I'm going to do it anyway. And then, 2 months later, they're like, well, I changed it back into a tub. And you do get the outliers where, you get an animal that is super, super, super chill and they put it into an enclosure and it does okay. The bioactive side of things, they do kill the plants with their urine. It just is what it is. So if you want to use plants, use plastic ones or whatever, and they will burrow and dig stuff up. They will kill the isopods with their urine because they do pee much more frequently than they defecate. And, far more frequently, I see people who are gung ho, like, I'm going to prove you wrong, and then end up having to put it back in a tub because the animal's not happy. And for me, I want the animal to be happy. I don't care what, people on the internet think about how they think that it should be kept. I want the animal to be happy and less stressed out. And I can tell you from all the ones that I've worked with, they are much less stressed out and much happier in tubs than they are in enclosures. Take for that what you will. If you want to try it out, go ahead, do that. But I will say that even of the ones that I've worked with, when I take them from a rack, and I've got pretty good sized rack, if you take them from a rack, even a big tub. You can get tubs that are the size of an enclosure, right? So at the end of the day, what are you really arguing right now? It's like people are like, well, I need to, people said that bioactive is the best. And it's like, okay, there's ways that you could do it. Honestly, if you wanted to do a blood python in a bioactive enclosure, you would just need a 8 or 10 foot long enclosure by 4 or 5 feet by 5 or 6 feet, where you could create layers of soil and drainage layers and swamp and this, that, and the other. You could probably do it in something that size, but do most people want to put a 4 foot blood python in a 10 foot enclosure? Probably not. And so
Yeah, yeah. So what size tub do you generally keep in for like a blood python? Like what's your preferred tub size?
So I've got a 74 quart rack. I like it's like a little bit of a shorter, wider, longer tub. It's probably got right around the same dimensions as like maybe it's a little bit smaller than like a 4x2.
Okay.
Um, maybe like 3x20 or something like that. That's pretty good. They seem to do pretty well in those. The double wides from I think Freedom Breeder work pretty well, and then I think Vision makes a tub that is like a boa breeder tub. Those are like for your really big ones. I like that size tub a lot. It's kind of a big clunky rack, but it works really good. And then the one that most people use for adults is the Christmas tree tub rack, and those ones work pretty good. They're a little bit taller, so it's a little bit of, I don't want to say wasted space, but it's much taller than the space that they're going to actually utilize.
Hmm.
So those ones work pretty good. I've used all those ones in the past. They all work pretty well. The double wide tubs I think are my favorite when it comes to the adult short tails.
So, do you think it's like an individual personality thing? Like, do you think that there's some that may do well in an enclosure, or do you think that it's they like just generally speaking, they're going to prefer that tub and the security?
I will say that 95 out of 100 are going to prefer the tub.
Hmm.
And every now and again, you'll get one, at least from the things that I've seen online and from my own animals. Uh, every now and again, you get one that's like exceptionally chill. That's fine with it. But the vast majority of bloods in particular, short tails, hit or miss. Because I find that blood pythons are much more high strung than short tails, like the Sumatran short tails or the Borneo short tails, in as a general rule. So I would say that especially for bloods, they do much better in the tubs. It's gonna be the outlier that's okay, or I would consider thriving in a
Hmm.
enclosure as opposed to in a tub.
And what about feeding? How often do you feed your short tails?
Babies once every 1 to 2 weeks, kind of let it ebb and flow with the time of year. Adults once every 3 weeks or so, unless it's like gearing up for breeding season. The females I'll pump up a little bit extra at the end of summer into fall to try and get them the reserves up for breeding. But to be perfectly honest, I do things a little bit differently than a lot of other people do. I kind of look at things, I don't want to say more naturally because I don't know what they're exactly, none of us know exactly what they're doing in nature,
Hmm.
but I feed my animals much more sparingly than a lot of people do. And I think that kind of leads to a more like natural growth cycle. So you can get animals that are, you know, 3 years old, where some people have 3-year-old animals and they're 6 feet long and they're, bigger than a loaf of bread. And I think that in the wild, like evolutionarily, they're much less likely to have hit food that frequently to get them that size in that amount of time. And that's kind of something that we've in the hobby made the standard, because a lot of it is looked at in terms of breeding, and you want to get your animals up to breeding size as soon as possible. So 3 years, slam your females every single week, make sure they get something that's as thick or thicker around than the biggest part of their body, make sure that They got a hot spot that's 92, so they can digest it quickly and move on to the next thing. I definitely don't do that. I think that um, I don't have any evidence to support this, but I think that evolutionarily, it's a little bit tougher on their system to live a longer life, to really, you know, do well long term when they're fed like that. And so I feed my stuff quite a bit more sparingly. I have 3-year-old animals that are just coming up on 4, and they are, just hitting 3.5 feet right now. Uh, and I think that it's a little bit closer to what they would naturally be doing in the wild and like how their ancestors would have grown. And for me, I'm not in a rush to breed things. Like, I like producing bloods and short tails, but I'm not trying to like crank them out to make sure that I can sell some and put it money and do this and the other thing. Like, I honestly hate selling stuff. It sucks. It's the worst part of snakes is selling them. But so for me, just personally, I go at a much slower pace of growing things, and I'm not in a rush to crank out clutches and to breed them. I'm curious. I have a bunch of stuff where I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to see what you produce. But also, I am not trying to like just shovel food into them to get them there to do that. One of the things that I've heard recently through listening to some of the other podcasts, especially with people who actually do like scientific research and stuff, is that when snakes eat, their heart and some of their internal organs will get larger in size to compensate for the extra work that their body is doing in that digestion process. And and then after they're done digesting, or after they're primarily done digesting, the organs will shrink back down to a less elevated state. And for me, I think about these animals that are constantly being fed, constantly, pumping energy into their system, and their body's growing and every day, but it doesn't give their heart or the rest of their organs time to rest. And for anyone who does weightlifting or bodybuilding or any of that sort of stuff, you know that an important part of growth is rest. Honestly, for everything, just if you're just a living being on this planet, that's something that I've had a hard time learning, is that if you want to grow and you want to do all of these incredible things, you also have to make time to rest and to not go, 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 go. And that's tough for me because I am constantly trying to, we're only on this planet for what? We get 80 summers if we're lucky, right? 80. How
Yeah.
many I've already done 35 summers. I'm almost halfway through all the summers that I'm ever going to get. I need to do some shit. I need to get out there. I want to experience life. We're only on this planet for such a short amount of time. And that is something that I've had to take into consideration, because I'm one of those people who's like, go, 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 that I also need to rest. And I think that for these animals too, it's just as important that they get time to rest, and for their bodies to rest, and to, I don't want to say recover, but to not constantly be in a state of growth. Unregulated growth is never a good thing. Look at capitalism. I'm not trying to make this, but things cannot grow exponentially forever, or else it collapses. And I think that our bodies are a good example of that, and their bodies are a good example of that. And so I feed things sparingly. I do, like, if you looked at my animals, they don't look unhealthy. They don't look skinny. Like, I could post pictures of all my short tails. None of them look like it. You might think that they're younger than they actually are, because we've been, as a community, we're conditioned to say, okay, when a ball python hatches, it's 70 grams. And then by year 1, it's going to be 300 grams. And then by year 2, it's got to be close to 1,000 grams, right? Because breeding them, if you want to breed them in the shortest amount of time, you really need to make sure that you're hitting those benchmarks so that you can have a return on whatever money you invested. I hate to look at it like that, but that's kind of how people look at it.
Yeah.
And I've had people who I've sold snakes to, who I I'm like, okay, it's like a year-old snake. It's eating like adult mice. And they get it and they're like, what the hell? This thing's so small. Like, you're starving this thing. And I'm like, does it look underfed? No, it looks fine, but it's a year old. It should be bigger than this. And I'm like, okay, if you are feeding it every 5 days, absolutely. It should be bigger than that. But that's not how I feed my animals. And they're not unhealthy. They are perfectly healthy. Like, if you showed this animal to a vet and was like, hey, how does this animal look health wise? Looks fine. Looks great. You can't see any bones or ribs. You can't see their spine. Like, all of the benchmarks that you would use to gauge whether or not a snake is healthy or not, they hit all of those benchmarks. It is a healthy snake. Is it what they were hoping for because they really want to breed it in a year and a half? Probably not. Is that, did I do something wrong by doing that? That's open to interpretation, because I've seen people who buy a 2-year-old ball python that's eating adult mice and then they blast the person who sold it to them on all sorts of forums saying, oh my God, this animal's, it's 2 years old. It should be bigger than this. I was planning on breeding it next season and I have to put way more food into it. And it's like, okay, if you are looking at this from strictly a financial standpoint, yes, you're going to need to put more money into that animal to get it to a size where you feel comfortable breeding it. If you're looking at this as a living creature that is now part of your life, I don't think you can be mad at it if it's healthy and it is by all accounts a healthy looking animal, and it's maybe a little bit smaller than what you were hoping it was going to be. If you're mad about the money, say you're mad about the money, but don't say that the animal's abused when you bring it to a vet and it is a healthy animal, right?
Yeah, you
That's
could
something that the
say it's the
community,
opposite. The
yeah,
opposite of
that's
abuse.
but that's the thing. That's not how like the community as a whole would look at it, right? Some people would, and some people can have nuance in that conversation and say, hey, look, um, if you're buying this animal strictly to breed it and you wanted an animal that was bigger than this, that is a different thing than blasting somebody for having a 2-year-old animal that's smaller than you were expecting, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of wild. I mean, and I guess that's kind of the big thing. I've heard a lot of people say that they don't want to breed snakes full time because it'll make them do things that they wouldn't do otherwise. If
Yeah.
they're relying on that source of income, then you're going to push the animals harder, and you're going to do
Stress
some
is
stuff
it's a
that,
lot of stress, honestly.
yeah,
That's why I personally am not really wanting to do animals as a full-time thing anymore. It's not worth it. I don't ever want to have to sell an animal just so I can eat the next day.
yeah, it's kind of crazy when you put it that way.
Yeah. The majority of people are not making hundreds of thousands of dollars selling snakes. They're not. The
Yeah.
majority of people who do it full time are making just enough to cover their bills and then maybe to take one vacation a year. It's not like these people are making tons of money, and sometimes they have to sell stuff that they probably they wouldn't sell otherwise, or sell it to someone that they otherwise probably wouldn't sell them to. And
Mm.
I have had to do that before, and I don't like it, and I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah, I don't blame you. What about your scrubs? Like how like and being in the middle of winter right now, and you being in the Great White North compared to where I'm at in Florida, even though it was 39 this morning. How like are you dialing everything back at this time of year? And
Yep.
like and does that include like young animals that are like under a year old?
Yep, absolutely. I don't feed it during the winter time. I feed a lot of the stuff, like even the babies, once every 2 weeks or so. If they start to look like they're losing weight for whatever reason, like the room naturally cools down, so a lot of their metabolism slow down along with it. And I just keep an eye on the animals, and if some of them like look like they're hungry and they're wanting to eat, I'll feed them outside of the regular schedule. But a lot of the babies, I slow down the feeding once every 10 days, once every 2 weeks or so. And to no ill effect, these animals are not like, I think that as a hobby, we've gotten really, really far away from how these animals would naturally be going about their lives in the wild. And because it's been fed to us, like, feed them once a week, make sure you're feeding them every 5 days, make sure that they're getting them out something as big as the biggest part of their body, because it's absolutely, that's what you need to be feeding them. People hear that and then they don't think, I don't want to say like project that they are not thinking further about it, because maybe some people do think further about it, but that's not how I think they would naturally be going about things in the wild. And, there's two extremes to that, because there is the natural ebb and flow of seasons, and a lot of these animals are not equatorial, so they will experience these seasons and these dips where they will eat and not eat. Like, I've got some corn snakes, and you can find corn snakes in North and South Carolina. Throughout the winter months, they're probably not eating. Like, maybe on a warm day they might get something to eat, but honestly, it's a bigger risk to them to eat than to not eat. And so naturally in the wild, from December until March-ish, May, like March, April, they're probably not eating anything. Several months of no food. Now, if you told somebody who has a pet corn snake, hey, from from Thanksgiving until the end of March, do not feed your snake. Every single one of those people, if they're not like keyed into reptile history, they go, no, it's gonna die. I can't possibly do that. It's horrible. Like, why would you ever tell me to do that? And in some ways, yeah, if you keep a corn snake at 90 degrees and you don't feed it for 5 months, yeah, it's probably gonna lose some weight. It's gonna be burning calories and it's not gonna do great. But if you take a corn snake, and I got my boy at the bottom of my rack, there's no heat on that level, so he's at whatever the room temperature is, 60 something degrees, 60, 70 degrees, and I might feed him once or twice throughout the winter time, but he's fine and not losing any weight. He's thick as hell, and these animals are much more resilient than most people give them credit for. They are much more dynamic than people give them credit for. And when I worked in the pet store, I would have people who would call when we're closing, right? And it's like a Wednesday. They call us and they're like, hey, can you guys stay open? Wednesday's my feeding day for my snake, and I really need to get a mouse for him, because they're thinking like, somebody who's fasting and they haven't eaten for a day and a half. And by the time that you get that meal after a day and a half, you're like, I'm going to die. I can't, and in their mind, we live on such a different schedule than reptiles do. Like, you have to eat a couple times a day if you want to stay healthy, basically, right? You have to be putting calories in order for your body to do the things that it needs to do. Our bodies burn up calories even when we're just resting, right? Because our bodies were endothermic, and so our body's creating heat. It's burning calories even when we're at rest. Whereas reptiles, since they're ectothermic in general, they are not burning as many calories. And so they can go through these large periods where they're not eating with no ill effect. It's what they've evolved to do. But trying to get a person out of the mindset of a mammal, because most pets, mammals, fish, you have to feed them all the time, right? You got to feed your cat every day. You got to feed your dog every day. You got to feed your fish a couple times a week, at least, right? Getting out of that mindset and recognizing that this is a completely different paradigm of animal that you're interacting with is scary for a lot of people first. And also, it is hard. It's just hard to, trying to explain to somebody who is a pet snake that they love dearly and they feed it every Wednesday at 7 p.m. every week, trying to be like, it's okay, you can come in tomorrow. Like, they're like, I won't be there for 2 hours. I'm like, it is okay, come tomorrow. Please don't. I'm not staying around for 2 hours. You can feed your snake tomorrow. Those people have a framework of schedules. Everything for a human is a schedule. We built our society around schedules. And you go to the gym 3 times a week. You make yourself lunch and dinner every single day, and breakfast if you're being, a good little noodle. You are, you're visiting your family on the big holidays. You know, there's so many things where our brains are set up for schedules, and in nature, for most things, there's no schedule. There's no like these snakes are not going up. It's Wednesday. It's time for me to eat. You know, you can condition them to be like, oh, it's been roughly this amount of days, and that's usually when I get fed. So that's when I'm expecting food. You can do that, but in the wild, they're not going. Shit, man, it's Thursday. I get fed on Thursdays. Where is the birds? Come here. Come hither. I need to eat. It's Thursday. Don't you realize? No, they're hunting. They're out there like throwing their net out into the water and hoping for gold, you know? And some of these insular species, like these creatures that are living on islands, it's like they might have one meal a month the majority of the year. And then some bird migration comes through once a year through, you know, or maybe twice a year, where there's thousands of birds that come to the island, and these snakes are just gorging themselves for those like 2 weeks that those birds are there. They're eating every single thing that they can catch, and they're just stuffing themselves full, and their body is just like metabolizing. And, you know, how would you account for that in a captive setting, right? Because you're thinking, oh, I'm feeding him every Wednesday. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm feeding him an appropriate size meal. When in nature, he's like, oh, I get like a little lizard here and a little lizard there. And then for 3 weeks, I just eat as much as I can fit into my body without throwing up, right? And if you try to do that in a captive setting, it might not even work. Because who knows? Maybe they're like, oh, that's the hottest time of the year that those birds come through there. And so their body metabolizes at a higher rate while that coincides with those birds being there. So they're able to burn through all those things that they're eating and digesting rapidly. And if you're thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to, you know, I read that there's 2 weeks where they get fed and you're not bumping up their temperatures, or they don't have an area where they can thermoregulate properly, it's not going to work in a captive setting. And so we as keepers need to have a nuanced look at how we do things and how we approach keeping, in my opinion. You know, this is all views expressed on the Expert and the Idiot podcast are solely, you know, my personal viewpoints and don't reflect that of the company or their sponsors. So basically just that I think that people should kind of reevaluate how they feed and keep things. I think that we've built this framework of schedules, and the snakes are not on a schedule, man, unless you put them on one. Yeah. They're dynamic animals. They're much more capable than we give them credit for. And just because we have said that, okay, you need to feed them a meal that's as big as the biggest part of their body once a week, every week until they die, I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about things.
Yeah, it's I mean, I keep like a schedule just to, you know, like know where I'm at with feeding, just because I mean sometimes I'm so busy. I got, you know, 2 kids, and I mean this week I worked 66 hours and it's all sorts of craziness, and all of a sudden you're like, when did I feed them? It feels like maybe a week ago, and then you look and it's like, shit, it's been 3 weeks since I fed them, you know, or you know, it's like, dang, I got to go through and feed them. But you pull them out and they're, you know, they're totally fine.
Perfect.
You know, it's like, yeah, there's no problem here.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, I guess my fear is that I'm going to like stunt something, you know, like, but I mean, I would imagine that you have to feed them such a small amount of food in order to like full blown stunt their growth, you know, to where they're never going to hit their genetic potential. That
I think that's like a tough one, because people talk about genetic potential, right? Or like, I'm not calling you out on this. I think that's I've heard a lot of people talk about this, like, oh, a snake got stunted, so it's never going to get as big as it's supposed to get. And it's like, sure, okay, how tall is the tallest human?
Oh man, you know, what is he, like
7'10"
4 or something like that?
8 foot, yeah. Now, if I get underfed as a child, right, and then I start getting fed properly into my teen and adult years, I'm not going to get 8'4", man. Genetically, I'm not getting that tall. Like, it's not in the cards. Both of my parents are like 5'6". the fact that I'm 6 foot tall is a modern miracle of genetics, right? Both of my parents, their brothers are all tall, so like 6'4", 6'3", and everything. So they had the genes for me to be the height that I am. But I'm not gonna get 7 foot tall, man. It's just not in the cards for me. So when people see a snake that was like maybe a little underfed as a baby, and then fed up and like fed properly once it gets to an older age, and then it gets, a ball python that gets 4 feet as opposed to 6 feet, they're like, oh, it's stunted for the rest of its life. Come on, man. Maybe that ball python wasn't gonna get 6 feet long. Like I have a 22-year-old, 23-year-old ball python, and he is like maybe 4 feet long. Now, would some people say that he's stunted? Sure, absolutely. Would some people say that, maybe he wasn't fed to his full potential? Sure, absolutely. But I have a 23-year-old ball python. How old is your oldest ball python? Like,
Yeah.
Come on, man. Like, the ball pythons have been recorded to live up to 40-something years. How many of these ball pythons that are getting fed every 5 days are going to live that long?
Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm really, really curious. And that's not like a superiority thing. I understand why people do it. But also, like I said, this is not how their bodies are meant to grow. Evolutionarily, it's just not how they're meant to grow. Can they adapt to it? Maybe. How long have people been breeding ball pythons? 30 years? Like really breeding ball pythons? Maybe 30 years. So who's to say that we haven't done irreparable damage to some of these creatures by feeding them the way that we do?
Oh yeah, for sure. I had Nick Mutton on, and he was talking about, the rate at which ball pythons are bred and the amount that should be out there. There should be like a 6-inch layer of ball pythons like around the world,
all over the soil. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's 40,000 on Morph Market right now.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But then, and then people get them, and they're getting them as big as they can, as fast as they can, and pumping out some more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, people are going to do what they're going to do. And I understand why a lot of people are interested in breeding ball pythons and in a lot of the other species. Crested geckos are being really heavily bred right now. And even some other species too. I won't harp on those, but I understand why people are interested in breeding, because I am a breeder. I do produce my own animals. I think that we're overdue for a change in perspective when it comes to breeding and production, because some of these people got in it for the snakes because they like making cool snakes and they like having cool snakes. And some people got in because they learned that, oh man, a Pompeii ball python sells for $3,500. PSA, I don't know if that's the actual price for Pompeii's. I'm just making things up right now. But some people see a cool looking morph that sells for a lot of money and they go, oh man, I could do that. And then everyone's like, yeah, you can do that. Buy some of my snakes. And they do. And then they get in over their head and they're like, oh man, I didn't really do this for the right reasons. And they sell everything and they blah, 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 all that stuff. I think that the hobby is overdue for a reframing of how we look at this, and I hope that I'm wrong, and I'm gonna preface this next statement with I hope I'm wrong. But I think that the next several years are going to put that into perspective for a lot of people.
What do you think is required?
What do you mean?
To change the perspective? Like what direction do you think it needs to go in from where it is now?
I wish that people would just like listen to, podcasts and go on that personal growth journey. But how many people work like that? How many people in their personal life are dealing with some really heavy shit and then just like epiphany themselves one day to be a better person, versus how many people go through some serious shit and then go to a therapist and work through all that stuff and work through the mud and deal with their demons. And change who they are fundamentally. It's two very different things. Can people do it the first way? Yeah, absolutely. I've seen people who are keeping, and then all of a sudden they're like, man, what am I doing? Like, I just like these snakes, and then they change everything how they're doing. And then for some other people, they have something like nidovirus hit their collection that kills everything, or kills the majority of their stuff, and then they're left with empty hands and a broken heart, and they have to go through. I shouldn't say they have to go through, but they do end up going through a really tough growth and restructuring phase. And over the next couple of years, I think that a lot of people are going to be forced into making some tough decisions with their collections, whether or not that means selling things or downsizing or just keeping the stuff that they like, or investing a lot more money into what they're keeping and how they're keeping it. So like I said, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that that's not what we're going to see over the next couple of years. But judging by inflation and the cost of housing and all of that jazz, I am not very hopeful. I get this very strong feeling that the next couple of years are going to be really tough for people who try to make a living keeping reptiles, or people who have got big collections. I think that it's going to force people into some tough places where they're going to make some tough decisions and either have to let go animals or whatever. And I think that I would like people to be able to look at their stuff and just read the room, like look at the greater viewpoint of like what's going on with everything, and then make adjustments for that. But do I actually think that that's how things will go? I don't think so. I think that people will be forced into making tough decisions, and then they'll have to look at how they do things, and then maybe do things a little bit differently.
What made you decide to move south?
The weather. I hate the cold, man. I can't stand the snow. I hate it. It's the worst. It's terrible. I will speak bad about winter every single day of my life. I hate that shit. My dad is from the Caribbean, and I got his Caribbean blood. If it gets below like 72, I need a hoodie on. I can't deal with it. It's too cold for me. I would much prefer that it be 80 degrees and 100% humidity, even 90 degrees and 100% humidity, than have it be below 70 degrees outside. But where I'm at in North Carolina, it gets cold for a couple weeks, and then it goes right back to being moderately temperatured for a good amount of time. And then it's hot throughout the summer. So I can deal with a little bit of cold. That's fine. But when I lived in New England, like the winter before I left, we got hit with 2 blizzards in a weekend, and one dropped like 31 inches of snow, and the other one dropped like 36 inches of snow. And I was like, that's it. That's a wrap. No more. I'm not doing this. Can't do it. I will not do this. So that's the main reason why I moved. And then also North Carolina, there's a variety of different counties where you can keep venomous snakes, and I am very interested in getting my own personal collection of venomous snakes. So that is something that is still on the horizon for me, something that I'm looking forward to, the only thing that's keeping me going right now. Not the only thing, but one of the few things that's keeping me going right now is the hope that, one day I'll be able to have some rhino vipers and some copperheads and some, other tree vipers, wagleri, and things like that.
Nice. Yeah, that's kind of a dream of mine one day, but I don't know. It seems pretty slim chance of it happening where I'm at in Florida. There's not many people around me that I can rack the hours up with that are required. So
that's okay. Don't ever rule it out. It's always a possibility. I thought about moving to Florida for a little while, and then they outright banned scrub pythons. And so I was like, well, can't do that anymore because those are my favorites. So they just did the no thing. And it's wild to me that you can get some training and get a king cobra, but you can't have a barneck scrub python. Like, that's wild.
Yeah. And it's not like we have barnecks like hanging out of trees or anything here,
Could you imagine? I would just move there just to put some outdoor enclosures. Come on now.
We don't even have retics that are established, so it's like I don't know. They went crazy. They really went crazy and just started picking large long snakes out of a hat,
Yep. It's wild because they even added like the Dachshund's anaconda, I believe, and that's one that's never been imported to the US. They're like, we want to make sure they don't come to Florida. And they're like, actually, they've never even come into the United States before. Like, that's, where did you find? I didn't even know that species existed. This is interesting.
The king horneye might be on there too.
Yeah, and there's like no king horneye in the U.S. anyway, so.
Yeah, it's crazy. What is it about scrubs that make them so special to you?
Their intelligence. I love how smart they are. They learn you as much as you learn them. They're constantly calculating. They're interesting. They get to a good size. They demand respect, and if you don't respect them, they will disrespect you in a big way. And as somebody who's worked with every kind of snake under the sun, the vast majority of snakes that you can see in the hobby, they are the way that their mind works is incredibly interesting to me. On top of being just pretty snakes, they are very interesting. How they move, how they climb, how they sit, how they interact, all of those things just really put them at the top of the hill for me. They're just like something that I've always admired, and something that I'm glad that I'm able to work with.
Do they spend a lot of time like perched up in branches, or do
Like
they
50-50. I've got certain individuals who are like perched all the time. And then I got some that are like, well, perched sometimes. And I got some that are like hardly ever perched. So it's all over they're, each one of them is very individual. Like, and yeah, I'll say that. Each one of them is individual. Some of them perch a lot, and then some of them are not as into it. But seeing a big scrub curled up like a green tree python is cool as hell.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's insane. They're so beautiful. Do you have some that don't like being handled? I mean, you have a lot of pictures of yours just like all over you.
Yeah.
But do you have any that you really can't do that with?
One in particular, Ursula. She's one that I got from somebody who lived in Florida. And before the ban took place, he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I've got these scrub pythons. Do you want them? The ban's going through. I won't be grandfathered. I need to get rid of them." And he had some southern scrubs, some Merauke scrubs, and the barneck. And I was like, "Oh, I'm interested in the barneck." And he's like, "She's captive bred." I was like, "Cool." And she is hell spawn. She's my only snake, period, I have that will strike at the side of the enclosure. Now I talk about how smart scrubs are, right? She is like, I don't want to say that she's dumb, but she is the exception, because most scrubs know that the glass is there and they'll go right up to the glass, but they won't like bonk their head into it. She like, if she sees me walking around too much, she comes over to the side, boom, boom, boom on the side of the enclosure. And so I try to leave her alone as much as possible, but she's my only one that is hyper defensive like that. Most of the rest of them are a little bit squirrely, like inside the enclosure, but as soon as you get them out, they're okay. I've only got, and most of them, like I'll say maybe half of them, when I first got them, really defensive. But the more that I work with them, the better that they are. And so the vast majority of them, I can take them out and handle them. I use a hook to get them out of the enclosure, but once they're out, they're chill, they're cool, everything's cooling. But I've got like a couple where I got to keep an eye on them, because every now and again they're like, "What'd you do?" They look at me like I did something wrong, and I'm like, "Oh, what did I do?" But the majority of them are and I like that you have to pay attention to them when you're working with them. It keeps it interesting for me.
Yeah. Hell yeah. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me. You got so much knowledge, and I'm sure once I get my bloods, I'll be hitting you up and asking you questions. I know.
Always.
I'm so excited.
Hit me up. Don't be afraid.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
Check me out on Instagram for the time being. Rob is keeping it real. As long as Meta doesn't really mess all that crap up. I still do have a TikTok, kinda. Rob is keeping it real. Check me out on the Reptile Talk podcast. We're available wherever you found this podcast. We're in those same places as well. Check that out. Do not add me on Facebook. What?
Do you have a morph market?
I do, but I don't really post on there. I don't produce at a level where I sell stuff all the time. And so I have a Morph Market account. I don't really post that much on there. This season, I will probably have some things that I'll be able to post on there. I have some stuff now where I could post it, but I hate selling snakes. It's the worst. Like I post some. I have a DSLR. I take really nice, high quality pictures of animals. I post usually 2 or 3 pictures showing each side of the animal, top down. You can see all the pattern. And I still get people who are like, "Can you send some more pictures?" No, I will not. I will not. You can see every inch of that snake. If you have any
That's
other questions, I'm happy to answer them. But no, I'm not sending you more pictures. I can't tell you how many people have been like, I just want to get 5 more pictures of this animal. Okay, cool. So like shipping is this much, and you never hear from them again. It wasted my time just so you can get a couple extra pictures for your gallery.
Dude, it's so funny that you love breeding snakes and keeping snakes, but not selling snakes.
That's how, honestly, most people who keep and breed snakes, that's how they are, honestly. From the majority of the people that I know, they're like, man, if I didn't have to deal with selling these snakes, this would be the perfect hobby. Like if I could just, like, as soon as they're hatched out and feeding, I could just not see them anymore and then have some money. That would be great. Not have
I
to
know.
talk to anyone.
Yeah, I've got a pop one python that I decided not to go in that direction with that project, and I'm like, I need to sell him, but I'm just not because I don't want to. You know,
Yeah,
I don't want to deal with it. So I might just keep him
that's fair.
forever just because I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, I literally have got a 2-year-old blood python that I've just been like feeding, and I'm like, oh man, she's getting really pretty. And I like posted it on my Instagram story. It's like, if there's somebody who's like actively looking right now and you don't need a bunch of extra pictures, let me know. And one of my friends from Florida was like, yes, I'm very interested in that snake. I was like, perfect. Perfect. It's yours. I'll give it to you at a super cheap price because I just don't want to deal with posting it anywhere and dealing with all the ding dongs that are going to be, well, it says that it's a year and a half old. Why isn't it eating large rats? Leave me alone.
How many grams is it?
I don't even want, if someone says that to me, I don't answer their message. I don't care how many grams it is. The only times I've ever measured a blood python in grams is when I worked at Nerd because people demanded it. It was the worst. It was so stupid.
How many ball pythons did you guys sell at Nerd?
Oh, I don't know. I have no
Like
idea.
they must have been
The year
crazy.
where we produced the most that I saw, I think we produced like 300 clutches or something.
Oh my God.
It was a lot, yeah. And then, some of those females are really big, so they're dropping 10 egg clutches, and so I don't remember how many we produced that year, a couple thousand or something, and sold a good amount of those and kept some back. And we sold thousands and thousands of ball pythons. And the good thing about having the pet store directly below was like we would sell stuff in the pet store all the time. People would come in for their first pet snake, and so we were able to hook people up with a cooler snake that we maybe didn't want to post on Morph Market because we're like, it could maybe be het for this, that, and the other thing, but somebody's just getting it as a pet. They don't care. They're just like, I just want a pretty snake. So we sold lots and lots and lots of ball pythons. Lots of them.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thank you again. It was good talking to you.
Yes, sir. I had a good time talking, and I hope that people enjoyed the episode. And make sure that you guys like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And hope you guys had a good time.
Hell yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir.